So, good afternoon, everyone. I want to introduce myself. I'm Helen Rosenfeld, the Executive Director with the Math Science and Engineering Fair. And we have started this speaker series in an effort to connect you with sort of pathways and stories about people's decision to pursue STEM educational paths and careers. And so I'm excited today to introduce Nick Rabb, who will tell you a bit more about his story. And I will pass it off right now to you, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Totally. Thanks so much, Helen. Yeah. And welcome to Helen, Katie, Abigail, and Bill. Thanks so much for joining us. It's awesome.
I'm just going to, I forgot one housekeeping point. So for those of you who've joined, feel free at any time to enter a question into the chat function, and we'll make sure to loop back to your questions, and don't hesitate to ask anything as we go.
For sure. Yeah. So like my little spiel is all about asking questions. So I would really love any questions that come up for sure. No reason to be shy. I'm just a goofy grad student. Okay. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. I'm Nick. Like I said, I'm a PhD student at Tufts University over in Medford outside Boston. And I'm studying computer science and cognitive science jointly. Just like really fast background for me, I did my undergrad college degree in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, at the Rochester Institute of Technology in computer science. Then, and welcome to the new people, welcome. And then after I graduated, I spent a couple of years working as a software engineer in Boston. That's why I moved here. I worked for GE, General Electric, the ones that used to make the fridges and the light bulbs, and also for a small startup called Notarize. And then after I worked in industry, I wanted to come back to school. And now, yeah, I'm a grad student, and I spend a lot of my time doing political organizing as well with two groups, one called the Sunrise Movement, if anyone knows it, and another called Massachusetts Peace Action. So I'm just gonna talk generally about this kind of question that I've been studying in my program. So just to really de-jargonize everything, when I say I study computer science, that's like, I spent a long time learning how to program computers and different architectures and like how our computers work, all that type of stuff, how to process a lot of data. And then the cognitive science portion of my program is like all about real human brains. Why they work, how we think they do the things they do. It's obviously very complicated. And then at the intersection of the two is kind of the realm of like artificial intelligence and machine learning and data science, stuff like that. Trying to honestly use computers to learn more about the way our brains work and vice versa. So the question that I'm going to talk about a lot today that my research has focused around is the question of why. Just the one word, why. It's a question, oh, and here's my cat. She's very nice. She loves to get on the Zoom every time I talk. So yeah, the question why is one that we naturally ask quite a bit, but then kind of stop asking as much maybe at a certain age or at certain parts of our lives. And it's actually the question that I spent a good chunk of time researching. And it's related to a process of cognitive reasoning that I'll get into called abductive reasoning. So every time I say abduction or abductive reasoning, you can just think of it like the way it's spelled is like if like aliens abduct you. It's like basically the same word, which makes searching for research about this a little funny. And so I'm going to talk about this why, this question asking, this abductive reasoning, and how it has kind of shaped my life in a lot of ways and led me to a journey towards science that I did not think I'd be making. So I want to start kind of like throw it back to my youngest self, because I said that in some portions of our life, we're really good at asking questions. I think young people are really good at asking questions. When I was a much younger student, when I was in like elementary school and early middle school, I was like very curious, right? I had big ideas. I wanted to know like why the universe worked. I wanted to know all about space. For a stint, I really loved dinosaurs and I wanted to know all about dinosaurs. And I know it's kind of goofy, but I just thought a lot, right? I had a lot of like why questions. And I would theorize about a ton of stuff like, oh my gosh, what would happen like if you use the wheels that are rotating on your car to like charge the motor battery and, you'd have a self-sufficient car? Or like, what if you used magnets to levitate people and you could just like fly through the air? Stuff like that, which may seem silly, but it's like a really deep curiosity that in the cognitive sciences, people study a lot in regards to younger people and younger children. But then sort of as I got a little bit older, I started to get a little less curious. And if you sort of like move to like late middle school or high school, I kind of like started to fall out of this deep curiosity. I started to feel like more socially conscious, more self-conscious about being curious. It made me kind of feel like a nerd, right? For wanting to like know things and wanting to ask big questions about the world. And I did not want to be a nerd. I didn't want to be weird. I wanted to be cool and to do like cool people things. And I just kind of wanted people to like me because it's obviously hard enough to be a young person. Why make yourself so weird by wanting to know things about the universe and space and stuff? So, like through school over time, I was still taking, like hard classes in school, but I didn't really like them as much, and I really stopped trying in some ways. And honestly, sometimes it wasn't even the social factor that made me not want to ask these big questions, but it was even just the way that school worked, right? Like if there was a topic in class that I was really, really interested in and I thought was really related to my life, we would spend maybe a week on it, if that. It's kind of brushed on, and then there's really not time to like dive into these big like curious exploits that you may want to dig into, because you have to like fulfill a curriculum and take a test at the end of the year, and there's a whole lot of workings and machinery behind those tests and how they affect our teachers and students in the school in general. So sometimes they take precedence over our natural curiosity. So between those two things of the social side and the kind of like school standardized-ish side, my curiosity was totally squished, which took me into college. And like I said, I studied computer science, but really, and I was in school for 5 years because we had to do a lot of internships as part of school. But really for like the first 4 years of college, I didn't really like it academically. I was like good enough at computer science, but it didn't really make me like happy in a big way. And I ended up like filling way more of my time doing clubs and activities. I did improv comedy for a really long time, or like ended up making games with friends, or like trying to start a business. And by the time like I was almost done with college, when I looked back, the thing that I liked the best was when I got an opportunity to kind of like explore one passion of mine in making video games with some friends, because we got some state funding to try to start an indie game company. And at that point, I was like, okay, whatever, maybe computer science just isn't for me, but I'll give it a shot. Like maybe it wasn't, maybe like classes were not fun, right? So I was like, okay, the thing I liked was making a game. Maybe I should just get a job and everything will be fixed. Maybe I'll really like working and find a lot of fulfillment in that. And lo and behold, that wasn't even really super fulfilling either. So kind of long story wrapping up, that kind of like brings a good segue into back into the research question. Because it turns out the thing that was holding me back in a lot of cases was that I was super bad at asking myself this question, why? So, all right, back to the research and the question of why. I'll leave you like with a little cliffhanger for that second. I really wish I had asked myself that question more. I wish I had asked myself things like, why do I think liking to learn is nerdy? Why do I feel like I need to be popular? Why did I go to college for computer science even if I didn't really love it? Like, why did I stick with it? Why did I love making a company and making a game with my friends? But then didn't love working after I graduated. So when we ask questions like this and search for answers, that's the process that I mentioned before of abductive reasoning or abductive inference. So really quick, because I wanted to fit in like a cool little like cognitive kind of / philosophical lesson about kind of how our brains work. Abductive inference, abductive reasoning, the process of asking why, is one of 3 types of inference that our brains can do. One is called deduction. So you may have heard of this if you've heard of like Sherlock Holmes, right? People say Holmes is the master of deduction, right? He comes to these crazy conclusions based off of all these facts. And people are like, how do you do it? He's like, well, I'm very smart. So it turns out that deduction is the process of reasoning from absolute truths. So a good example of deductive logic is saying, okay, all cats are mammals. My pet TK is a cat, therefore TK is a mammal. Every single statement, absolutely true. So we know that the conclusion is guaranteed from the truth of the premises, the first parts. So that's deduction. The second type of kind of like logical thinking we can engage in is called induction. So an example of induction is something like, okay, 95% of students are brilliant. You are a student. You are probably brilliant. So it's this process of statistical reasoning from evidence, because we don't really know that it's guaranteed that you all are brilliant, but I would assume that you are, based on the evidence and other things like if you're attending this talk, you probably are very smart and care about cool stuff. So that was deduction and induction. So the final one, my one, is abduction. So this is very similar to inductive reasoning, but here's an example of abductive reasoning. So it's, I have seen many elephants, and they have all been gray. Therefore, elephants are gray. So that's, again, reasoning from statistics, because you've seen a bunch of elephants over the course of your life, and all of them you've seen have been gray, so it's perfectly reasonable for you to say, well, the thing that best explains my observations is that all elephants are gray. So that's called abductive reasoning. And the difference between abductive reasoning and inductive reasoning, the two kind of statistical ones, is that abductive reasoning is all about explanation. So it's saying why something is the way it is. So hence that the reason that I was saying it all revolves around asking the question, why? So formally, the way that people talk about abductive reasoning is you start with an observation, and then you search some sort of database for hypotheses, for potential answers. And then you try to find the one that best explains what you observed. So in the elephant case, it's your observations are the elephants. Your database is, I guess, your brain. And your explanation is just, well, yeah, whatever, elephants must be gray. And it turns out this type of reasoning is very useful in all sorts of areas. So this is where like it kind of gets back into the computing aspect. So we can take this type of reasoning and actually write computer programs to do stuff like this, to do this type of reasoning from data. So, and it falls under the category of artificial intelligence. So some of the ways that it's been used in computing is, say, in like medical practice. So there are systems that take a bunch of symptoms if you go to the doctor, and it will return the most likely illness that explains all the symptoms. Right? The symptoms are the observation, and then it finds the best hypothesis. In something called plan recognition, a computer could be observing someone, say, watching someone play, and this will reveal my nerdy bias, but watching someone play like a Zelda game or something. And it'll try to explain why the player chose to, say, defeat the second dungeon before the first dungeon. It'll explain their plans, right? And it can even be like the task of, maybe this is a system you all are more familiar with, but if you look at a bunch of pixels, right, which is like an image is made of pixels, a computer can determine what it is. It can say either that's a dog or that's a cat. And that type of explanation fits under the process of abductive reasoning. So my research took these types of systems that would look at data and have some sort of database that they would, try to gather hypotheses from to explain the data. And we expanded these types of systems to work under conditions where there's something like where you're a little uncertain. So it's like if you were trying to do medical diagnosis, but you didn't quite have all the information. Maybe some things were missing, or one of your symptoms, you're like, I'm like 50% sure that I have a cough, but I'm not entirely sure. Or if the system scours through all of its information and nothing really makes sense. It says, we designed a system that could just say like, I really don't know. There is no answer. And then taking that and doing the very human thing of saying, okay, if I don't know, well, I should probably gather more evidence. So we made systems that would come to those conclusions, like they need to gather more info. But what's specifically cool about my research program, bridging kind of computer science and cognitive science, is that it doesn't just stop at the level of the computer. The cognitive science part is super important too. So, while our work used computer programming to like make a model of this type of reasoning, it's funny because the process of making the model actually forced me to realize and learn a lot of things about how actual human thinking works. Because when you kind of have to put things into a concrete format, you end up learning a lot. And it made me realize a lot of things about my life that led me to coming to grad school and pursuing science rather than just, as I was sort of saying before, like the state I was in, rather than just kind of accepting that I deserved to be dissatisfied in like my job or my life, and like that this was all just inevitable. And in general, this is a phenomenon that like when sociologists talk about it, it's called, engaging in critical thought about our lives. That question of asking why is being curious, and it's being critical and saying, is there a different way that things could be, right? Is this probably isn't inevitable. So to loop all that back into my life and why I ended up here, I can definitely like point to a distinct turning point in my journey where I really started asking a lot of those why questions about myself. So to return to the earlier ones that I threw out as examples, is like, why did I think that liking to learn was nerdy? Well, kind of like the culture that I grew up in and the way I was socialized and the friends that I had revolved around different things like celebrity or sports, instead of like me really trusting that what I enjoyed was worthwhile. Why did I want to be perceived as popular? Well, it's really hard to be a young person, right? You don't really know how to navigate the world. I had pretty low self-confidence and I wanted to get affirmation from other people. Why did I go to school for computer science, even though I didn't particularly love it the most? Well, sometimes we internalize messages about careers, which ones are good, which ones are bad, from our parents and our friends and our culture and all these things. And, this is like one of the reasons that I love cognitive science and computer science in particular is that, engaging in these types of research programs can show you that something like that seems really dry, like abductive reasoning, like you're talking about logic and reasoning and all these things that you're like, how does this ever apply to my life? Well, I literally took that process of abductive reasoning and I applied it to my own thoughts and feelings. And, kind of as a side note, answering these types of why questions about yourself, it takes a lot of trust in yourself, and it's really hard. Which is something that, often like society doesn't really encourage you to do stuff like that. So it's tough, but like asking myself these types of questions really shaped me and forced me to dig into my own brain to search for hypotheses. Like basically my brain is my database. And I would, observe my behaviors or my feelings when I would feel bad or when I would feel good about something, and engage in the process of abductive reasoning to try to explain why I felt the way I felt. And this is a super important research topic in the world of artificial intelligence too, because one of the biggest problems with like complex systems that you might hear about from Google or Facebook or Microsoft that do all these, crazy predictions, and they play all these games and they beat, real humans and all these wild things. A huge problem is that they can't explain why they make the decisions that they make. It's sometimes people refer to it as artificial intelligence being this like black box that you just can't explain, and you can't figure out why it does what it does. And it's because these systems don't have the capability to ask themselves why. They don't have the ability to do this type of abductive reasoning. And, it could make you think, because like maybe we don't naturally think to encode this process, like as programmers, we don't think to encode this process into these AI systems because maybe we're not as practiced at it as we could be. Maybe we don't reflect on ourselves as much as we should. Or maybe we're not taught how to do that in school and we're just not very good at it. So to sort of wrap everything up, now after kind of studying this like question asking, this why process, it's funny. I realize it's really no coincidence that I fell into science once I started asking these types of questions, because it may seem weird, but when you think about it, if we think through those three things, observing something, asking questions, coming up with potential explanations, and then picking what the best explanation is based on some data that you have. I mean, that's really all that science is, right? You can even use the same scientific terms to describe the same process. So, you observe something in the world, say you see things falling from the sky, and you want to know why. You want to know why things fall from the sky. So you make some hypotheses. These are your potential explanations. And then you engage in some experiments, and you try to, obviously control things and engage in the process of science to try to figure out what best explains what makes the world work and why you observed what you did. And this deep curiosity, it makes me realize this deep curiosity that I talked about that I had when I was young and then kind of like fell out of and felt really squished. That like is the process of science. Like having that trust in yourself to really think that your ideas are worthwhile and that your unique perspective is valuable. It's tough in our modern culture, but that's really what the project of science is all about. If you think back, I don't know if there are any history nerds out there, but I'm also a history nerd. I think I'm just a general nerd. But if you think of the project of the Enlightenment, which is when a lot of this scientific reasoning started proliferating more throughout the world, this was actually this was the entire purpose of the Enlightenment, to look at the culture around yourself and kind of be brave enough to take yourself a step back and say, okay, what are the things that we take for granted as just, we don't even try to investigate them because we just think that's the way things are. In the Enlightenment, that was in a large part religion, right? People didn't question religion as much. It was just sort of taken as the catch-all explanation for everything. But then science really started to encourage people to do this type of experimentation and to come to like verifiable and repeatable conclusions about the universe. And obviously you all know that science since then has totally transformed the world. But in a weird way, few people really think of themselves as scientists or even being able to become a scientist. We think that we have to wear like fancy lab coats and read 1,000 journal articles and, have all these degrees and be like, blah, 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 like all this BS. But really, when you frame science as just the simple act of, seeing a bunch of gray elephants and reasoning, well, I guess all elephants must be gray, or feeling kind of down and asking yourself, why do I feel so bad about this? And thinking critically and observing things around your life and being brave enough to ask that question of why, and make you realize that like a lot of us are actually more scientists than we are sort of encouraged to think of ourselves as. Yeah, so I guess I'll leave it with that. That's about the whole of my spiel.
Thanks, Nick. I know it's hard to do that without the faces in front of you of our participants and to talk to yourself in a way for half an hour, but we really appreciate that. I want to invite everybody to, you can either unmute or you can add a question to the chat feature and I'll read those out to Nick. But while you're thinking of some juicy questions for him, I'm going to kick things off and ask that maybe you can talk a little bit about, you sort of have talked about your process of discovery of what you care about, the why, and what you'd like to do with it. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps inflection points or whether sort of how you informed yourself to get where you are, whether it was through certain people in your life and how you found those people, things you read or watched, like how did you kind of build out that community that perhaps informed where you are now?
Totally. That's a great question. Um, yeah, it's, I guess like to get where I am now from where I was, just kind of like being a software engineer. Um, when I started like asking questions, I guess I didn't even really know where to turn in a lot of ways, but I just started kind of like randomly searching. And I found first that there are like a lot of really interesting things online that help anyone really like work through these questions of like, what do I want to do? Like, who do I want to be? Stuff like that. Um, and then I sort of found that as I started to ask those questions and like find those resources, then I found like, honestly, like really influential scientists that I ended up looking up to in a lot of ways who think very similarly. So like to name a few, like one of my favorite academics is Noam Chomsky, who's like a huge proponent of science. Or you can think of, you know, other scientists like I don't know, Yuval Noah Harari is like a really great scientist. So once I started searching and asking the questions, it was easier to find people who were answering the questions. And then as I started to change the way I thought, I found that the people around me changed too. And I was more inclined to make friends with people who asked those types of questions too. And it actually did change my whole community.
Thanks. We have a question here from Hamza. If you could give yourself any advice from when you were 14, what would you give?
Oh my gosh. I was
Think back.
14. I was so awkward. It was so bad. I would, I guess, just say to myself that like you, you may like think that what you like or what you want to do is weird or different, but that honestly everybody is very weird and different. And the trick is that like if you believe in something a lot and really enjoy it, that's like the most fulfillment you can ask out of life. So like just be super brave.
Um, Thanks. There was a point in which you were well, you talked about how you really weren't happy studying computer science. Um, how did you figure out the angle through which, or the lens through which you could use the part you did like about it
Mm-hmm.
to answer other questions? So that transition, I think, from college perhaps to graduate school,
Mm-hmm.
and how do those two dovetail for you now in terms of your graduate studies?
Sure. It's actually it's a super hard question in computer science because a lot of computer science is, I mean, it really is focused around like the algorithms and making things really efficient and kind of like doing the mathematics behind it. And like even in artificial intelligence, it's there is a lot of that. So to sort of take it and bridge it into this realm of like using what we can learn through computers as ways to sort of learn about ourselves is honestly not very, it's not a very popular way of thinking, even though I think a lot of people would realize that it does make a lot of sense. Um, so honestly, I think it's like a matter of, I just sort of started broadening what I was interested in general. And then I guess asking really hard questions to wonder how the parts that I did like about computer science could fit into like how I really enjoy thinking about how we think, and how we can like better live our lives. But I would definitely be lying if I didn't say it was a real challenge.
We have a question that I think ties into this is what's next? What are your plans after graduate school? And perhaps kind of tied to that in my mind, what are some of the applications for what you're working on? Or if you don't know, what are several options that you're considering?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when I made the decision to go back to school, it was really to get the degree and teach, because I think I imagined that the way that I thought computer science and still think computer science can be useful for a lot more things than just algorithmic efficiency and making computers work faster and better. I'm sure that resonates with other students and other people. So I think like encouraging that broader horizon of computer science is important. So I would love to find some way to bring that type of thinking and teaching to more people after I'm done with grad school in 5 years. So I have quite a while, and I'm sure my mind will change 1,000 times until then. And I totally forgot what the second question was. The second part of it was.
Well, I sort of provided the option, like, what are some of the different applications perhaps of what you're doing? So if you don't know yet, because you do have time, what are some of the different paths you could imagine taking? Or what are some of the paths that people who are your peers have taken that sort of illustrate how the work can evolve?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a very typical path, honestly, in like the mix of cognitive science and computer science is to go into artificial intelligence, and you will be guaranteed to get a very good job at Google or Apple or Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon or any of these tech companies that are honestly clamoring for people who understand sort of both the cognitive side and the computing side. But I really do think that just a different application for this work would be to really argue for, sort of like I said earlier, that process of like using computation to like, I mean, it's like the same thing as when you have kind of like a fuzzy thought and it really doesn't become clear until you just like try to write it down. And then you find that once you use the words, you kind of like understand it a little better because you had to define it, you had to put it into words. And I think the same thing is possible with when you write a program to mimic some pattern of thought, you really do understand the pattern of thought a lot better. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for using this to sort of be a gateway into researching potential ways that any type of thought or reasoning could work. And then of course, using the systems to try to come to like honestly interesting conclusions about data, because a computer could process way more experimental data than even a team of scientists. So if you could really make a scientific like artificial intelligence, that'd be some crazy stuff.
A lot of people are worried that computers will completely automate all the jobs in the future. Obviously, with some of science, that may be possible, but not all. What are your thoughts on what may or may not go away as a result of some of the computational work that you and others are doing?
Yes, that's a very good question. It's a tough one because a lot of unfortunately, I guess without getting into too many deep cuts of like economic and political theory, like there is a big incentive for honestly for companies to automate a lot of pretty much everything because it's a lot cheaper. So where we saw a lot of like typical manufacturing and factory labor go away in sort of the first round of automation, a lot of people write about the fact that that might happen with like more thought-based work. So things like call center jobs could be totally automated if like sort of like a Google Now type of chat AI was so good at interfacing with customers that one system could do the job of, you know, what used to be thousands of people. So in general, there is the potential for AI to do a lot of things that people typically do in the workforce. But I think there is an important, crucial turning point that we need to take once this starts happening to kind of redefine what we mean by work and really big ways that our society works, so that we're more liberated by the technology rather than, well, now you're out of a job and we're not going to give you any meaning for your life, or we're not going to give you any pay. So I think it could be really great, but we really need to change the way that people think about society first.
Fair enough. Yeah. So we have one more question, and I think then we're coming up on our 45 minutes, so we'll wrap it up. The question is, have you considered entrepreneurship or joining a startup where you think you can make a difference in your field?
Aha, that's a great question. Yes. Well, I used to work for a startup, and I can say it's pretty tough. You work a lot. Not to say that I'm lazy, but it's a lot of work, and it's pretty hard work. Yeah, I mean, I personally bounce back and forth between entrepreneurship or like going the route of teaching through like established systems of school or academia a lot, because I do think that there are unique opportunities in entrepreneurship to kind of do the teaching and do the research in a way that would benefit more people who aren't who maybe don't even have access to academia, college, and like this advanced type of education, and would really benefit them. And some of my like favorite, I don't know if you can call them thinkers, but they're organizations, just have like YouTube channels where they think through these big questions and they do a lot of research and then publish the results in like more accessible ways. And it's totally economically viable. And I think it's changed the game in a lot of ways. So long answer, compressed, would be yes, totally consider it all the time, and then get scared that I want to do it so badly and then rethink it.
Well, great. Thank you for being so open and sharing so many of these thought processes with us. So on behalf of the crew that has participated today, I want to thank you, Nick, for your time. Sure. And I also want to thank everyone who joined. I want you all to know that this is part of a series that we're having every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for the next few weeks. You can go to our website, scifair.com, and right on the homepage, there's a link to the list of speakers. So you can join us again tomorrow at 3:30 for our next speaker. And if anybody has more questions for Nick, you can feel free to get in touch with me, and we can potentially facilitate another conversation if you'd like to dig in deeper to anything that he shared today. So thanks again, Nick, and thanks to all of you who participated.
Thanks so much for attending, everybody. And thanks so much, Helen. I really appreciate it.
We enjoyed having you. Thanks.
Thanks.